We're going to get underway with our afternoon session now, after having our brains spent by the amazing Sir Ian and his son Ben. We've got our Building Industry Trust panel now, and I would like to ask Katrina Shanks, CEO of the Australian and New Zealand Institute of Insurance, to please come join us on stage. A round of applause for Katrina, please.
Thanks so much for that. It's my pleasure to be here today. ANZIIF is a proud supporter of ICNZ. We're 140 years old and we've been supporting the insurance sector for that period of time. We all know that New Zealanders need to increase their financial health, wealth and well-being, and the way to do that is to build public confidence and trust. And we also know part of building their financial health, wealth and well-being is giving them financial resilience, and that is insurance. So this is an important part of building a healthy economy and a healthy community. So we all know that trust is really hard to build, but really super easy to lose. So that's why the panel today is going to be fantastic. Then I'm going to pull this subject apart for you so you understand how to build that trust and how to build a good reputation for the sector. Because all working together, that's the only way we're going to build public confidence and trust. So sit back, absorb the panel, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much, Katrina. All right, New Zealanders see the value of holding insurance to protect themselves and their assets with relatively high levels of coverage in New Zealand compared with other countries. But how are insurance companies perceived by Kiwis? Well, David Talbot, a director at Talbot Mills Research, will present his findings to kickstart the session, followed by our panel discussion on building industry trust and reputation. So it is my pleasure to introduce our third panel, and as you hear your name come on up, David Talbot is already here. He is a pollster and strategist to politicians and business leaders internationally. This has included the last two New Zealand Labour Prime Ministers, Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins. He provided research insights for Labour's win in the Australian 2022 federal election and is currently involved in strategic, political and corporate research across most Australian states. The Honourable Chris Farfoy, Chief Executive ICNZ, is joining us as well. He became Chief Executive in April last year. He's a former Member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister who served in a number of roles, including Minister of Justice, Immigration, Commerce and Consumer Affairs and Broadcasting and Media. Before that, Chris worked as a journalist, including at TVNZ and the BBC. Andrew Hall, Chief Executive, Insurance Council of Australia. Now, Andrew joined the Insurance Council in September 2020 as CEO and Executive Director. He joined the ICA from the Commonwealth Bank, where he served as the Executive General Manager for Corporate Affairs for 7 years, and prior to that he was Director of Corporate and Public Affairs for Woolworths Limited for 6 years. Karen Stevens is joining us, Ombudsman, Insurance and Financial Services. The ISO scheme is responsible for providing a free and independent dispute resolution service for customers of participating financial service providers. Most of the insurers belong to the IFSO scheme because of the resources and data made available. Tell me, is it IFSO or do you say IFSO? If so, thank you, that's much easier to say. Because of the resources and data made available to IFSO scheme participants, certainty of cost and consistency of decision-making. Karen is a barrister and qualified arbitrator and mediator. And we have Sir Jerry Mateparai, GNZM, QSO, KSTJ, former Governor-General of New Zealand. Sir Jerry, no Ngāti Tūwharetoa, Ngāti Kahungunu, Te Āti Haunui a Pāpārangi, Ngāti Tama Kōpiri and Ngāti Rangi, served as New Zealand's 20th Governor-General for a 5-year term until 2016. Following that role, he was the 27th New Zealand High Commissioner to the United Kingdom from 2017 until 2020. From July 23 to March 24, Sir Jerry chaired the government inquiry into the response to the North Island severe weather events. We'll hear a little bit about that in this panel. Now, a reminder. Put your questions into the app, address them to a specific panellist if you would like to do that. And we're going to start this session with David Talbot. Now, what he's going to do is have a scene-setting presentation based on the mood of the country with specific polling questions commissioned by ICNZ, and he will take you through those. Now, a round of applause, please, for David.
Thank you for that. I feel like an absolute fraud standing here talking to you about trust when as a pollster I must be amongst one of the kind of like least trusted professions in the world right now. So if you'll excuse me that, I'll kind of press on assuring you that these are very trustworthy figures I'm going to show you here today. I think a little bit of what I do sometimes as a pollster as using numbers and research to tell stories as well. And I think, ideally we use that information, some of the numbers I'm going to show you here today, some of the insights I can provide from qualitative work as a way to kind of help businesses diagnose problems and then start solving them. So I've got 9 slides for you today. It's a kind of a pretty tight presentation. I'm just going to go through some industry-specific numbers and some kind of background numbers that kind of give you a bit of a flavour of where kind of Kiwis are at on some of the big issues affecting them in their lives. This was taken from a really decent-sized representative sample of New Zealanders, so it's 1,400 respondents, and that data is weighted to the census. So I talked about trust. You can absolutely trust these numbers, and I'm very happy to answer methodological questions from what I'm sure is a very numerate kind of audience as we go. So I'm going to start with the bad news. People aren't feeling very positive about the direction of the country right now. This is a question that we ask in almost every survey we do just to get a kind of a lay of the land. We ask whether people think the country's heading in the right direction or whether they think things are off on the wrong track. And you can see from the way these lines are on the screen here that those thinking the country's on the wrong track, that's been dominant now for quite some time, almost 2.5 years. And so to put that in context, we've been asking this question for 35 years, and this is the second longest period of sustained net negative mood that we've seen. So, there's still kind of another 6 months to go before it could potentially, take the gold medal, as it were, in terms of the longest period, but we feel like we're kind of well on that journey. That negative mood is, to some extent, driven by perceptions of a weak economy. And so here you can see when we ask about the state of the economy, and this is people's perceptions, so we can, talk about whether it's kind of the actual truth or not, but this is what people tell us when we ask. 21% say good or excellent, 78% say poor or not so good. So a really kind of dominant view that things aren't going quite the way they would like. So still quite a lot of pessimism out there. Here are the issues driving people's vote. Larger words on this slide indicate that people, the respondents, chose those words more frequently in the survey. So you can see obviously a very clear message coming out of the word cloud here around cost of living and economy, with health there as well. Cost of living and economy can often be read as essentially the same issue. If I were to ask in a focus group what people meant when they said economy, often they would come up with stories about grocery prices, filling up the car, rent and mortgage payments, and so on. So to some extent, economy and cost of living are actually one issue, and have been, and I think will remain the dominant issue in this picture for quite some time to come. So here we ask about affordability concerns, so kind of digging down another level. We ask how concerned people are with the following household costs: groceries, petrol, electricity, insurance, rent and mortgage payments, and phone and internet. And you can see that while groceries dominate, those next 4 are all really high, with over 2/3 of people here expressing concern about insurance premiums. So definitely kind of one of the factors that are on people's minds in terms of how they feel about those pressing household concerns right now. This slide breaks those concerns down by age range. So you can see the ages along the top in terms of the bands, and the coloured bars kind of help you get a feel for how these issues move in terms of importance through those age bands. And you can see, probably not a surprise, that insurance kind of rises in importance to people as you kind of go through those age ranges, and tracks very closely with electricity, but ending up on kind of over 80% for the 60 plus segment there. So definitely kind of something to bear in mind. We asked also about expectations of the cost of insurance, so what people expect to happen. And obviously here you can see that people's expectations are of rises to premiums, and in some cases quite steep rises. So 84% say that they expect premiums to rise over the next few years, and 38%, so almost 4 in 10, say they expect them to rise a lot. Here are the perceived issues behind those expected premium rises. We asked people to choose from this list, and they could choose more than one, as well as nominate a kind of top factor driving premium rises. So you can see that inflation and those weather events, risks to do with weather events, come out first and second, but insurance companies boosting their profits is in third place. A little bit of a kind of obviously a concern around that that's part of the public perception driving that expectation of rises. Here's the one on trust. And I think a bit of a challenge here in lots of ways. You can see where insurance falls relative to the other industries that we've measured, sitting on a net negative 11 between petrol companies and supermarkets. So I think kind of no doubt that there's some work to do on that front, but you've got a benchmark now to work from. So I think that this really does kind of bring into sharp relief the kind of overall picture at the moment. Hopefully some of those slides that I've presented, to the start of this presentation give you a little bit of context for why people might be landing there, and I'm sure lots for the panel to talk about. Final one, I think this is. Perceived responsibility in terms of making sure that the industry works well. So we asked here about who's primarily responsible for ensuring the industry functions well. And you can see there at the top that while insurers were thought to be central, respondents in the survey also felt that there were significant roles for both government and consumers themselves. So hopefully some food for thought, a range of starters there for the panel discussion, and I'll hand over.
Well, thank you very much for that, David. As you make your way, I'm going to ask you what you would say is the biggest insight from this work that you've done.
Thank you. It's probably a bit of a cheat answer, but it's not just from this work. But I think that the kind of continued pressure on people, those sort of cost of living factors that are driving kind of voting sentiment and kind of sentiment in relation to the direction of the country, really like right across the world, almost whatever political jurisdiction you're in, and the effect that that kind of anxiety and pressure that people are feeling daily has on their judgments in terms of trust and social licence for corporates is absolutely the kind of thing that I think was front and centre through this work.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that that insurance is a big concern up there with rent, mortgage, phone and internet, that people expect their premiums to rise. 84%, that's incredible. Is the relationship between the insurer and the insured always likely to be a challenging one, do you think?
I mean, I think that whenever you've got people buying a service and perhaps not always understanding, what it is that they're kind of purchasing and the some of the factors driving the costs of that service, I think there'll always be kind of room for misunderstanding. But I guess that's both a challenge and an opportunity. And in terms of driving trust, perhaps there's a kind of an education piece that has to happen as well. That's a big part of, moving that forward.
Well, let's talk about that misunderstanding, as you call it. Chris, where do you think that arises from?
Look, I think there's always a general perception of people in insurance. I think you need to be careful of stepping back and seeing the whole picture. I think David's numbers might talk to the transaction, but I think if you think about the experience that people have had, especially in the last 2 years when you come to settlements, with the speed at which the people in this room moved to get 96% of those settlements done within 16 months, and if you look at the coverage that came about of it, there was not as much noise, as you might say, as we had in other events as well. So I think that's one of those situations where two opposite things can be true at the same time. I think, we've come through when it mattered in terms of the settlements, but there's still this underlying issue with the perception of insurance long term that I think we can try and manage if we're talking the consumer language about accessibility to insurance, because that's not just an issue in the point in time now, but as has been talked about both in the regulatory and climate panel, it's going to become an even bigger challenge. And if we're talking about how we can kind of face that challenge for our customers, then I think we're onto a winning strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that, as we mentioned, most people expect their premiums to rise, and I think a lot of people, I think what your research showed was that customers see a risk of greed by insurance companies behind that rise in the premiums, and might believe that it would be tempting for insurance companies to kind of realise that anxiety by raising the premiums to raise the bottom line. But the story that you're talking about, Chris, is that actually insurance companies are paying out.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at the long game. I think in the last 24 months, $3.8 billion in settlements has been paid out, and that money doesn't come from nowhere. And then on the horizon, there's another challenge with accessibility and affordability that we as a group have already been talking about today, about what can we do to reduce that risk in order to keep that insurance, accessibility of that insurance, and maintain that relationship that people do have with insurance. So again, it's talking about the right things, and making sure that, and I talked about it a little bit in my opening remarks, that we're very focused on what our message is the ICNZ on behalf of the sector to keep people's assets protected, because they do that at quite high levels, the underlying importance of that to the economy, but also to support the people in this room as well.
So, Jerry, what do you see as the biggest challenges for this sector in winning people's trust?
Well, I guess, so my personal experience in the insurance area is that we've got insurance and I make a claim and I get paid. And so that's my start point. And I think that's the start point for a lot of people. It's, your personal experience. The other part of it is the information that I'm getting about that insurance. And I think there's a role for the industry to be more forthcoming in the information that you provide to the individuals. So I think you have a responsibility to connect with individuals. But that information has got to be consistent with what they're hearing from other parts of the continuum. And today, we've heard that in the continuum, there's the individual, there's the insurance companies, there's banks, there's local government and central government. It's got to be joined up. And if it's one thing that we learned from the inquiry that we did into the weather events, is that there needs to be a joined up approach to what you do and what you say and what you deliver. Most people will trust if they're getting consistent information consistently and it is accurate. But their accuracy is their personal view of what accurate is, not mine.
What does a joined up effort look like?
So, I'll come back to the inquiry we did. So the main finding out of the inquiry was that the emergency management system was not fit for purpose. A large part of that was because it was all disparate, and there were parts of the system that worked really well. So over in Gisborne, for example, they had a really good system. In parts of the Hawke's Bay, it was not very good. Then they had people coming in to provide support to the Hawke's Bay. But those people who were in the emergency management system, but they didn't know how Hawke's Bay worked. Now, that's not joined up. So that's one part. The other part is, in central government, ministers are looking to what's happening, and they couldn't even have a common operating picture about what was happening in New Zealand, let alone the world. So there's it's a matter of join the dots and make sure that the information flow goes up, because you'll have people in Wellington who will be asking for information from the people who need to be doing work to save people's lives. So it's a joined up approach right across, the systems.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot, actually, about the joined-up effort that's needed, that certain agencies and sectors need to be in lockstep. But let's have a look across the ditch to Australia, Andrew. So the industry's been through a turbulent time with weather events, premium increases and government inquiries. How has all of that affected trust, and what lessons has the industry learned?
Well, I mean, it's great to be in a room full of a lot of other people that are the most popular at dinner parties. Our research in Australia is very similar. So what is interesting, though, the numbers are all very similar to what David presented, but what is interesting is our biggest advocates are people who have had a claim. Our biggest detractors are people who have never made a claim. So what that tells us is that the percentage of people for whom a claim experience goes wrong and often is the ones that are then need help from customer advocates and the media and the like get amplified. We're only as strong as our weakest link, and that tail of problematic claims that emerge after any event require just as much care and handling as the ones that have been very straightforward and processed very quickly. But I think, when it comes to the matter of trust, and it's something we've been very focused on for the last few years, I think particularly since the 2022 event of flooding, and I say that as we sit here watching a 6 kilometre an hour cyclone move ever so closely towards the Gold Coast and northern New South Wales, which I suspect will repeat 2022. We're very, very, very worried about it. But hopefully we've changed, because it's actions, not words, as Sir Jerry just said. It's actions in terms of the claims handling process that people go through, and it's actions in terms of helping on the affordability and the availability side of things, that transparency, that need for information. We simply, as an industry, can no longer say to people, oh, it's all very complicated actuarial stuff, you'll never understand. I think they're saying, no, try me. Explain to me exactly how you're getting to this point of pricing my property, my car, the liability for my pub, whatever it is. So I think we do still have a big mountain to climb in terms of those actions. We are being tested all the time, and we know that we've got to front up.
So you're saying the customer needs to have trust in the sector, but equally the sector needs to have trust in the customer with information.
Yes, and I think too often over a long period of time, and I guess, I've now had the joy of working for supermarkets and for a very big bank, and now for insurers. Often there develops industry myths that, we can't tell anyone that. That's our data. We can't give that information. That's commercially sensitive. Only we know the extent of flooding, and I'm not going to share that with, that competitor over there will then make a decision. I can guarantee that competitor over there is already pricing themselves out of the market because they don't want a share of that market. I think what's interesting in our research as well, and I think it goes to the theme that's come up a lot here, punters actually see that insurance will work best when we are working with government. And I think our obligation is for governments and insurers to come together to share data, the right kind of data, usually that's peril data, and come to some sort of compact with government where our demands on government in Australia, our demands are that at the moment you take about $8 billion in taxes off insurance premiums, but show me the $8 billion that's been spent on resilience and mitigation, and I can't find a flood levy that's been built for 10 years. So what we should be saying to government is, if you're going to continue to tax people for doing the right thing, put that money back into something, and we'll work very hard then to try to bring down the premium. So
how would you characterise the relationship between insurers and the government in Australia?
We have the wicked problem that this is a 3-level of government challenge in Australia. Local government makes the land use planning decisions, state governments run the overall control of that and collect all the taxes, and the federal government is like the custodian of the insurance sector. So we've got to get all 3 governments working together. I would say we've had since 2022, I think there was a mindset shift that this is just the definition of insanity to keep just rebuilding these communities. Lismore with 5,000 homes destroyed, Brisbane, our major capital cities, and I'll give you a good data point. There are 225,000 homes in Australia that are sitting in a 2 or a 5% AEP, chance of flooding every year. In that cohort of homes, insurance penetration is less than 1 in 4. And a third of those people are living below the poverty line. So when government knows it's got a similar problem with the roads or with healthcare or something, it's incumbent upon them to act. I don't think it's acceptable in this day and age that in a country like Australia, we know that there's 225,000 homes, probably a million people living in basic poverty conditions, can't afford insurance, and every time it's about to rain, like it's going to rain in the next 4 days, lose everything. And so I think that's where the industry and government simply has to come together.
Karen, let's come to you. So the gap that you see between customers and insurers from your ombudsman perspective?
Well, we've been providing a service to most of the insurers in this room for nearly 30 years, Miriama, and we've learned a lot from that. And one of the things is that customer perception at the sharp pointy end, which is where we end up most of the time, is quite different from what an insurer would look at something and say, this is where we think it should land. The expectations over the last few years, probably since COVID, with weather events have shifted dramatically. So we don't have a lot of people coming to us these days with reasonable expectations. A lot of them come to us with unreasonable expectations of what the policy will provide, what the insurers will provide, and at a particular time when they're under a lot of stress and want things done immediately. So I think the first thing that needs to be looked at is to draw a distinction between a time when there is a national weather event or a weather event that is far-reaching, or some sort of natural disaster that affects a lot of people all at one time. Because the thing is that everybody gets under pressure at that stage. You get under pressure, your customers are under pressure, we're under pressure. The time to actually try and shift the dial, if you like, to get people thinking more about insurers being on their side is business as usual, so that your responses are within their expectations, that the timeframes are reasonable, that they can go and tell the good news stories. Because I think in this industry, as you've heard from the speakers before me, there is a real disconnect in New Zealand between the really good things that insurers do and the stories that get published by the media a lot of the time, and the sharp pointy end stories where somebody's been waiting for months for their house to be fixed after a weather event that happened 2 years ago. And at the moment, at the IFSO scheme, we're just starting to see those cases come through. So that's 2 years later, we're getting the really hard, gnarly sort of stories coming to us. And at that stage, the frustration of the customer is at such a level, and the expectations that have been created are at such a level, there is really very little that can be done to meet their expectations and give them the good outcome that they might have been able to achieve 2 years ago.
Let's come to you, Chris, as a storyteller. I don't know if you call yourself a previous former storyteller, but I always think that we are always storytellers. As a storyteller, as a former media member, what do you think that is about, the sense that you cannot get your good stories told?
Look, I think you have to be ready to tell them too. We put out a report in the last month about the claims experience in terms of the industry response to the North Island weather events. And it was a good story to tell, so we told it. I mean, we also pointed out some ways that we can improve. An important element of that report was we remember Christchurch, we remember Kaikoura, and all along the way we're looking to continually improve. And I think to get to 96% done within 16 months is a credit to the people in this room. So I think taking the opportunity to look and hunt for those stories is really important.
Do you think it's been successfully told?
Well, we're trying, and that's all you can do. And I think we've got to keep doing that. I think Karen mentioned a phrase that I think is really important in the context of the earlier conversations, that we've got to convince customers that we're actually on their side on the longer term. We're trying to make sure that insurance is still accessible and affordable for them, because we know things are going to get worse. And if we manage to convince investments to be made in infrastructure, policy to be changed, there's a shot at making sure, to Sir Ian Taylor's point, that we can protect people of the next generation physically in their communities, and also make sure that the $2 trillion of assets that we look after can continue to be covered as well. So I think people's long-held perception of the insurance sector is that it's about the transaction. It's about more than that, and this room knows that. So we've got to start telling that story better.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, in terms of media, we look for the drama, we look for the stress and the tension, the things that need to be resolved. And telling the insurance sector's story of a 96% payout rate it's a great fact, but it's probably not the most exciting one in terms of how you judge what you put into your news bulletins.
Yeah, and I think, look, even through today, we've got to not be scared of pushing the boundaries a little bit. We may have constructed the panels that are a little bit out there today, and you may have seen a little bit of that we're pushing some of the messages out there. We need to have these debates. They're uncomfortable debates for some communities, but if we don't have it, the policy decisions won't get made, and the sustainability and accessibility for the sector is going to be a real challenge in the future. And again, there's something macro about that, but there's also the challenge that we need to convince people that their biggest asset is their home. If you want to continue to pass that on to the next generation, having insurance is pretty important. But we also know that Nera said all these horrible things are possibly going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and how do we keep them safe from that? And actually, insurance underpins a lot of that. So how do we make it less about the transaction and more about, okay, well, we're on your side to maintain the trust that you've already got in us? Because, as you know, people have their own numbers about this. The level of insurance in New Zealand is high. How do we keep it there? Because the economy and the communities the confidence to do what they do every day without having to worry about what's going to happen if things go bad.
So David, tell us in a sentence, if you can, what is the story that the sector is telling, and what is the story that we actually can tell?
Not sure I know the answer to that. I think you heard part of it there, but in a really difficult communications environment where people are under that pressure and not always listening to the things that you want to say, boiling that down to, some things that will stick is a real challenge. Research is, I think, part of the solution, and that's not just a pitch for work, but I think having a really hard think about what that narrative looks and sounds like, and then trying to distill it so that it has the best chance of getting through is the kind of strategy that I'd adopt. But I'm sorry that I don't have a kind of more fulsome answer for you.
Anyone else want to pick that up?
I think it's one of the challenges that insurers have in particular, because this room's probably full of a lot of very rational people. Actuaries are very rational people. They think in numbers and data and the rest. And the problem with an insurance claim is that it's a very emotional situation. When you've lost everything, you're in a very emotional state. Or if you're staring at a premium renewal that you just know you can't afford, it's a very emotional state to be in. And I've found over a long time myself that when rationality is arguing against emotion, there's generally no winner. So I think probably one of the big challenges we have to do is, put ourselves in the customer's shoes always, think about what they're going through and frame it from that perspective. And one of the tests to embed within organisations is the can we, should we test. I think the second thing about insurers is, apart from being rational actuarials, we're legal contracts. And the easiest thing to do is ask the lawyer in the room, can we do this? Whereas you could also be asking yourselves as a group, should we do it? And often you get two different answers. And I think having a mindset like that, always balanced with the view that you've got to run a commercial enterprise. But these are the sorts of traits that I think are critically important.
We're going to come to questions from the floor. Just a reminder to pop your questions in. If you have someone that you want specifically for it to be addressed to, let me know. And also you can upvote on the questions that are there, and that will make the question rise to the top. So we have one here, and levies and tax make up a large proportion of costs for insurance. What learnings can ICNZ take from Australia's Insurance Council efforts to change levy/tax can make up more than 50% in commercial? Chris?
I actually want to hear from Andrew.
Well, we did run a campaign on it in New South Wales. And so in Australia, people have long forgotten that they're paying tax in their insurance premiums. Last night, when I got back to the hotel room, I actually received my renewal from someone in this room. And and it was interesting. They have set out the taxes. A third of my renewal, $1,500 in New South Wales, is tax. And I'm not sure any other product at the moment in Australia, apart from tobacco and alcohol, is getting taxed so heavily. So we have an agreement from the New South Wales Labor government to remove one of the taxes. Then all the states still have, except for the ACT, a stamp duty, and then they all have the GST, and they all get that money back. So I'm like a broken record nowadays. Every time I'm getting tickled up by a politician, and particularly in the current federal environment, lead up to an election, it is always very useful to point out the person with the biggest lever at the moment to impact cost of living relief for people with insurance premiums in this country is going to be that person that can remove the stamp duty and the GST.
In a world where risk-based pricing is essential, what is one thing insurers can do better when setting up or servicing policies to build trust and help change the perception of the insurance sector? Thoughts, Karen?
I don't know that I want this one. If I go back to good communication, and we've been talking about this in a roundabout way and directly, but good communication pathways with your customers is probably the best way you can do anything, because most of them don't understand how insurance works. That's the sort of information that we get back from our data quarter after quarter. The biggest problem they have is with scope of policy cover. Now you'd think that if somebody's buying a product, they'd understand what it did, but by and large, your customers don't. So there's a financial education piece, there is better, good news stories to come out as we've been talking. There are communication pathways at every juncture before you get to a claim, because by the time it gets to a claim, it's almost too late. You can't actually turn it around unless you do a fabulous job. And sometimes even when you do a fabulous job, the customer's perception of that is different because they're not getting the outcome they want. So there's an awful lot of work that can be done to stop the sort of cases that we see coming to IFSO scheme, where people have no idea. And some of them that do come are actually under financial pressure, so that's why they're coming. But the others just don't know how insurance works. So in terms of risk-based pricing, I guarantee if you went out into the street today and you asked 10 different people what that meant, you might find one who had the slightest clue about it. The rest of them have no idea. And that's your challenge. And I don't know how you fix it other than through educating the general customer base about what you do and how you do it and what they get for the premiums they pay.
What are you doing, Chris?
Oh, just echoing Karen and both Sajeri as well. I think it's the communication thing with customers, and I'm hearing a lot when I speak to board members and senior staff about moves to make sure that people can understand the makeup of their premium more. Actually, it's a job of ICNZ to do the macro job of getting the system to understand that, there needs to be coherence when regulators and other stakeholders add cost to a premium as well. We've got NHI, we've got FENS. Are they talking to each other? No, it happens at the same time. And that has material impact on both the members here, but also to customers. So there's that. And in some way, I think we can, sometimes in panels you're looking for that kind of silver bullet answer. There isn't necessarily one. But if we're talking about trust, I think for the response, just keep doing what we're doing. I think we need to be proud of what happened in 2023. Keep looking for improvements. I was speaking to Sajeri last week, and we want to be closer to the emergency response so we can get as much information at the outset in order for us to get our machines up and running, to know where they need to be and what we need to have the best response. So I guess it's, I think it was Karen, let's use this time while it's benign to get ready for what's happening, and also to have the conversations that we're having today. And I think importantly, off the back of today, advance. Because we could be
Take
back.
action.
Yeah, we could be here next year talking about the same things, and that's not success.
Yeah, and it is a tricky one too. I mean, Karen says there needs to be more education, and it's absolutely correct, but it's also what we say so often in these situations, isn't it? We need education, we need to tell our stories, and it's easy to forget to take the action that goes with it. So, Jerry?
Yeah, because the other thing I think that the industry has a role with central government in particular is to impress on them, as we found, that $1 invested at the front end in terms of reduction in the hazard scape saves you $4 at the other end, in the recovery end. And when you look at the amount of money that was sort of had to be reinvested into the consequence of hail, the Auckland anniversary weekend, and Gabrielle. So in 39 days, we spent, the government only spent $1.3 billion. And then insurance, you all paid a heck of a lot more. And I think overall, for those 39 days, it was $4 billion worth of money that could have been spent better elsewhere, that would have been better to have reduced premiums. So I think the ICNZ has a role in engaging with central government on the one hand, but also with local government, because local government is where the rubber hits the road, and that's where communities are, and that's where individuals are. And that's your business, right? The other thing, it seems to me, you're celebrating 96%. That's not good enough, to my mind. You should be aiming for something better than 96%. Hey, 96%, it's okay. But, why can't you be aiming for 100%?
Let's ask, are you aiming for 100%? Is it realistic?
Is that 100% realistic? No, because people got their own policies, and as Karen said, some people don't read their policies. But I think the important question that we asked ourselves is 96% is good. But we can do better, and I think the report could have been, yep, we're good, we're doing a good job, and pat ourselves on the back. But we identified areas where we could have actually had some better access to data or better relationships to make that response even better, which we're on to.
So Chris, do you think there could be a role for ICNZ to provide an overall natural hazard risk rating using data provided by insurance?
Look, that's been spoken about today. If that gets added on the to-do list, then that's going to be quite a lot of work, so I look forward to that. But look, last year we spent, I think Adam Heath mentioned it, that we spent a lot of time thinking about what our data game should be for the collective of the industry, which is not a small effort. So we're going to start off small, but there's a willingness of the members to be able to put that aggregated data together centrally, to help with the narrative, to help with our lobbying with the government, to help especially when the flag goes up when there's a major event. Even today I've been speaking to people from local government and other parts of the environment where they've got data that they may be able to tap in as well. I'm not sure who it was in the previous panel, but we need a base case for everyone to be able to say, this is what we all agree on, and this is where we go. Members in the room might have their own information that can help them market better, but we need a base case to be able to tell New Zealanders what the risk is to them and their communities.
Let me put this one to Andrew. How much should we make people aware of the cost of reinsurance and how that is linked to natural hazards risk?
With reinsurance, there is, a greater interest these days in reinsurance. I think someone made the comment this morning about the Los Angeles fires and how people, Amanda I think said, she was being asked, it was the case in Australia too. Immediately the question went up, what's that going to do for our insurance costs here? So I think whether it's reinsurance or insurance, whatever we're talking about, the community I think is starting to get its mind around the fact that it's all just pricing risk. And the job we've got to do is reduce risk and produce a narrative. And I think, particularly with reinsurance, that's actually a job for both of our countries to work together on, because when you go overseas and speak to the major reinsurers, they view this as one market, not two. So whatever movements are made in either side of the Tasman around insurance, it actually will have an impact on the other. We often have to point out to the Federal Treasury in Canberra that the more you want to expand reinsurance pools, the harder it's going to be for the whole system, and we're talking New Zealand as well. So that is it is a key discussion point.
Yes.
Look, I think that reinsurance narrative is really important for everyone in the room. Just want to acknowledge Minister Watts came with us to London last year to talk to those reinsurers, to talk about the activity that's going on in the policy space and across the political spectrum. They like what they hear, so I think that's really important that we have an ink story going to the reinsurers globally as well, so they continue to maintain that confidence in the New Zealand market. And last year's trip was the first in what I hope will be many, in making sure that we're sending our senior policymakers to see those reinsurers, to let them know what is being discussed and being implemented, being executed in order to reduce that risk in the country.
Sir Jerry, is the public perception such that insurers are looking to apply exclusion rather than look for ways to provide coverage?
Say that one again.
Is the public perception, I guess the only way you can measure this is through the mahi that you did on your inquiry, is the public perception such that insurers are looking, so do insurers look to apply exclusion rather than looking for ways to provide coverage?
Okay, I'll answer maybe in a slightly different way. I believe that I should be able to make decisions about where I live, essentially. And in making those decisions, though, I should be informed about the consequences of those decisions. And I should have the opportunity to, now to answer your question, to say, well, I don't want that bit, but I do want that bit. Is that going to be easy? I don't think it is. But I think part and parcel of where the industry could get to, and just thinking to what Ian was presenting, I think it's doable. I think that the industry here has got a wonderful opportunity to work out how can we provide insurance for New Zealanders in the way that they want it, when they want it, and where they want it. And it seems to me that ICNZ and the industry has got a role to play, both in providing the information about the circumstances that are affecting why they are charging what they're charging, but also the impact that if you don't pay your insurance, $800 million of Fire and Emergency New Zealand comes out of the levy. $10 million comes out of the government. Go figure. So it seems to me that there is a need to let people choose what they would like to be doing, how they would like to be living their lives, but also what they can afford, because that's, at the end of the day, it's affordability. And to Andrew's point, one of the other things I did for 2 years was working with Jim Bolger on the Kapiti Coast, and we looked at climate change and the impact of climate change and sea level rising. And it came very clear to us that you all are involved in protecting, helping, saving people's most valuable asset. And when they are looking at their house being right on the on the edge of the sea and it might get damaged, they look to you to provide some out for them. So therefore, it seems to me that if you can provide that for them, and also the information that goes with it, we're in a better place.
Ka pai. We do have to wrap up. I just want to allow everybody on the panel to leave us with your final thought, provocation. I'd like to end with Karen. So if we can start with you, David.
A provocation?
Final thought? Perhaps it's a provocation.
I think, I employ a guy who did those numbers. He was the guy, very numerate, helped produce those charts. I watched him a week ago comparing two policies with $1,000 difference between them, and a lot of words and a lot of numbers. He spent 4 hours trying to figure that out. And so I think some of the tension here is that if he doesn't know exactly what he's buying and can't figure his way through that choice, that can lead to problems later in the process. So my challenge is to try and find a way to kind of increase that transparency, take the pressure off people that are making that decision, and I think that will have payoffs down the track.
I think you're right. As a layperson, I would love to be able to make more sense more quickly of what's in front of me. Chris?
Look, I think looking at the numbers, we've got a job on our hands in terms of ICNZ about helping tell the insurance story. We're sharpening that up and a lot of the strategic focus as well. So it is a big task. We're going to need a lot of data and research to back that up in order to get the policy decisions that we need and the consumers into the headspace where those trust numbers are up. But I don't want this to be an exercise in self-flagellation. So what I would say is pat ourselves on the back when we do well and always look to continually improve.
Ka pai. Sue Jerry?
And trust is a two-way thing. And so, you build your trust by what you trust the other side to be doing as much as what they expect from you. So I think, for the industry, it really is about trusting that the individuals, they want the information, please give them the information.
Pairawa ngā mihi. Andrew?
As good as the ICNZ and the ICAR, I think the challenge really is to all of the insurers in this room within your own enterprises is to be bold and think about what it is that you can do to differentiate yourself from your competitors and actually lead the industry. So again, it's actions, not words, that build trust. And there is only a certain amount we can do in telling the story. A lot of it actually relies on big decisions. And I'll give you a brief example from my past. Remember we had
30 seconds max.
We had a Royal Commission in Australia into banking, and insurance, had a lot of issues. The Commonwealth Bank suddenly sat down one day and looked at research, another plug there for you, David, looked at research that had been going on for years. And what was the one thing they hated the most? The ATM fee. And the CBA just removed the ATM fee. It required the whole industry to shift. And I can tell you from that point onwards, people actually sat there and went, oh, the banks listened. I think that the ATM fee is out there somewhere, and I'd challenge someone in this room to have a go within your own enterprises.
Thank you, Andrew. Last word to you, Karen.
I think the thing for the industry is to try and shape your customers' view of what you do for them every day in all of the interactions you have with them. Don't leave it to one maybe perceived poor claims experience to be the only thing that they know about their insurance company, because I think that's where we see the issues arise. The claims escalate to complaints, and then you have unhappy customers. So if you can stem the tide, I really, really urge you to do so as early as possible.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Karen. Thank you to all of our panellists. We so appreciate you being here. We've got a little gift for each of you. There you go, David, Chris,